Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. The brain is the most complex part in the human body. This 3-pound organ is responsible for our intelligence, interpreting sensation, initiating body movement, and controlling all our behaviors. The brain and the rest of the central nervous system are composed of a variety of cells, but the primary functional unit is a cell called a neuron. All sensations, movements, memories, and feelings are the result of signals that pass through neurons of differing shapes, sizes, and functions. The average brain contains 80 to 90 billion neurons, the cell bodies of which form gray matter. The brain is a masterpiece of God's miraculous creation, yet over time, there are many factors that impact brain development and steps that can be taken to reverse some of the factors contributing to an aging brain. Dr. Timothy Jennings has been in private practice as a Christian psychiatrist and certified master psychopharmacologist since 1997. Board certified in psychiatry by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, he's a specialist in transcranial magnetic stimulation, a drug-free treatment for depression. Dr. Jennings is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, a fellow of the Southern Psychiatric Association, past president of both the Tennessee and Southern Psychiatric Association. He spent more than 2 decades researching the interface between biblical principles and modern brain science, and is a highly sought-after lecturer and international speaker, and the author of The God-Shaped Brain and The God-Shaped Heart. He's in private practice in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You can find out more about his book, agingbrain.com, and his ministry website, comeandreason.com. He appears here on the 3rd Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock and is the author of The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. Dr. Timothy Jennings, welcome to your edition of Revealing the Truth.
Eric, it's always good to be with you.
It's great to be here.
Things are going well for you.
Thank you. Things are going great. Even in this craziness that we're seeing, my deepest concern is for those who are just impacted by this to the point of almost being frozen in fear. The complete fear of the unknown, which is a very common fear. I was sharing the other day with clinical psychologists that there's 3 Greek words for love, but when it comes to phobias, there's about 2,900 different names of phobias, things we're afraid of. And it seems like we've glorified fear. And as this COVID-19 virus came out, you heard words like pandemic, and seeing places in stores where they talked about pandemonium. And I go to Israel every year. I take people to a place called Banyas, which is one of the 3 headwaters of the Jordan River. And Banyas happens to be the place where Jesus had the encounter with Peter, and he said, "Who do people say that I am?" And he said that, they say that you're Elijah, they say you're a prophet. He said, "But who do you say I am?" And he said, "Well, I know you are the Son of God." He said, "You only know that because of divine revelation from my Father. I stand before you at the gates of hell, will not prevail, and on this rock I will build my temple." He was standing at the gates of Pan's temple. Pan, the false god of the Greeks, half man, half goat, where there was a temple. And there was a hole in the ground where they were dropping live children as sacrifices to Pan. And it made me so aware that the word Pan and how much we glorify it in our vocabulary is really Satan's agent of fear. It's so interwoven that pandemonium, panic attacks, panacea, pandemic, all these things go right back to this author of fear, which is not God. And when you hear it enough times and you've experienced being in that place, it's a really eerie place. It has a spirit to it that is very off-putting, lets you know that there's definitely a presence still there that is not of God. It is unnatural, and because people feel it, it's a great place to teach. There's little grottos and coves that I can teach in.
You're exactly right in identifying fear. As soon as Adam and Eve sinned, they ran and hid because they were afraid. Fear, part of that infection of sin, and it's one of the number one tools of Satan: lies and fear. Those are his two big tools. And remember, Franklin Delano Roosevelt in World War II said, "We have nothing to fear except fear itself." And I think our society today would be served if we just took a few minutes to reflect on that. During World War II, I mean, you have to World War II. This is a serious threat to the world.
Right.
Millions died in this war, but Roosevelt says that we don't have to fear the war; we have to fear fear. I would suggest that there's an opportunity for people just to take back a moment. We have a real issue to deal with. There's a real virus out there. It can cause real sickness and even death. There's no question about that, not diminishing those realities. However, fear taking control will cause decision-making that will explode and exacerbate the damage to ourselves, our families, our communities, and our nation. So learning how to make reason-based and love-based decisions and not fear-based is the healthy path to go.
It's interesting that I've said for many, many years, any decision made out of fear is not of God and will not be blessed. And as I've looked at people's decision-making processes, they're fear-based. They're based on the consequences, not the benefits. And benefits are consequences, but the negative consequences. They make decisions because they're afraid they might lose something. We have Israel right now. The borders are locked down. The last tour group leaves tomorrow and flies out, and there will be no more, other than returning home Israelis. No one will be allowed into the country, period.
Until this is passed. Yeah.
Until this is passed. And it is spreading across Israel. The original estimates were 60% because they're in such tight quarters, because the communities are so close. They have hundreds upon hundreds of families in these high-rise apartment buildings that being able to sanitize and not bump into one child to another. And although children don't seem to be affected by it,
they seem to be able to be infected by it, but it doesn't seem to be as lethal in children as the elderly or those with compromised health already.
But they're carriers, and so they are able to infect others, just the same as the asymptomatic adults.
And because we don't have good numbers on the mild cases, those who are carrying it but don't get super sick, and we're limited testing, we tend to test those who are the most sick, the most aggravated, the ones in the hospital, and thus this could artificially make it appear that this virus is more deadly than it actually is, because we're not including in the total number of the infected those who are walking around and never really need to get medical care as their body deals with this. We don't really know truly, because the data is not there, on how dangerous this is. I think we have good data on how contagious it is, but contagious is just how easily you can get it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's fairly lethal. The common cold is very contagious, but it's not very lethal. And so we don't have good numbers. So because we don't have that then opens the door for fear to step in and to create the worst case scenario in people's imagination, because we are getting data on those who are the most sick with this, but we don't have data on those who are the least sick with it.
Exactly. And then we have communities that are not being monitored. We have the homeless. We have the people living on the street, the drug houses. There are literally hundreds of thousands who are not in a reportable kind of state. They're just left to their own, the human traffickers, the undocumented, who are afraid that if they try to seek out treatment that they would be deported. There's a whole non-quantifiable factor in this, and especially in the United States, that has made this a festering pot of fear.
Yes.
The run on toilet paper was astonishing.
Yeah, I'm still not fully understanding why that happened, but.
Well, you're a psychiatrist. Help us here.
I don't understand. I would understand the run on bread or milk or food. The toilet paper is not a survival necessity. It's just a convenience.
Right.
So, yeah, that one other than it's just fear driven, and when people get fear driven, they often are not rational. And then there is this certain herd mentality. They go in the store and you start seeing shelves empty out, and you get the sense of, if I don't get some now, I may lose my chance. And so well, there's one left, I better take it, because it might not be here tomorrow. And so that is all about protecting me rather than, I really don't need it. Even if it's somebody else may need it, I'll leave it for them. That's not how we think when we become afraid.
When we take a look in the context of what happens to the brain when it goes into anxiety, it goes into this, I want to call it an unnatural fear. I mean, there's real fear. You're in Chattanooga. Outside Chattanooga, a lot of brown bears. Every now and then, a brown bear will make its way into the community.
Black bears.
Black bears. That's black bears, and they're to be feared. They will turn on people. That's something that is real, and we know that the adrenal gland. There's a separate biblical lesson here. And that was the prohibition in Acts chapter 15 out of the law of why you cannot eat strangled meat. Strangled meat.
Yes, because the adrenaline and hormone surges, and you eat that, it actually is unhealthy for you and can affect your moods as well.
And it's cruel, and we don't serve a cruel God. It's a cruel form of death. It also fouls the meat, so it becomes very, very gamey. So people who have ever invited me over for deer that they hunted, and I would taste it, and they say, this batch is a little gamey. And I said, well, when you shot it, did you drop it or did it run? No, this one I think ran. Well, same response. Fear, the adrenaline's going into the muscles, going to be gamey. From a brain chemistry standpoint, as we look at the impact that these releases of adrenaline, releases of is it serotonin?
No, so it's adrenaline. So when somebody becomes fearful, a couple of things. We have the brain side, we have the awareness mind side. And when we become fearful, we actually become more tunnel visioned. We focus in on what we see as perceived threats, and we become less capable of fluid and outside the box thinking. Oftentimes, we become less tolerant of what we think would be extraneous opinions or ideas. We become much more aggressive in pursuing what we see as a solution to the potential threat. So our moods become more intense. We become more aggressive. We become more irritable. We become less socially enjoyable. this is what happens when we get ourselves under threat. We become very serious and very focused very quickly to resolve that. And so our capacity for deep thought is diminished when we're under threat. We're not doing deep thinking anymore. We're doing very immediate problem solving. And so that undermines it. So fear undermines cognitive development, deep problem solving. It undermines relationships. Relationships don't grow based on fear. What happens in a relationship is that the person, like even in a family, without fear, a father may be very patient, may allow his children to ask lots of questions, may be very gentle with them, but under a potential threat, the father takes charge, gives orders, even grabs hands and yanks them across the street. Okay, there's not time for discussion anymore. We're going to take charge, and so relationships become very hierarchical, very, very structured. They don't have that same dynamic of concern in the same way. This is what's happening functionally when we become fearful. And so when we have fear-based relationships, it's really about identifying threats and in taking actions to provide protection. In the brain function itself, if we stay under fear and we have the constant cascade of stress hormones, so your amygdala activates your adrenal glands, you not only get the adrenaline going, you get the glucocorticoids going, and the glucocorticoids over time, and when I say over time, not just the immediate 10-minute crisis, okay, but you're constantly stressed for days on end, that actually can have a damaging effect on our brain where we lose neuroplasticity. We have epigenetic changes where the genes that cause proteins to be produced that allow us to learn easier and sprout new connections, they actually get turned off, and we can actually have withering in certain part of our neuronal tree that makes it harder to learn, and we lose flexibility, and we can end up having depressions, or so you might just call it burnout or exhaustion, and those types of things can happen. And if we stay chronically stressed for years, that increases the risk of dementia as we age.
You know, it's so interesting that, and I'd never really thought about this. The words "fear not," 365 times in the Bible. Interesting number. There's a number of 365s in the Bible. Enoch walked with God. He lived 365 years. We don't really do the back.
Why do you think that is when a Jewish year is 360 days instead of 365?
That's well, the Jewish day set by the Hillel calendar.
It's 360 years, right?
Right.
I mean 360 days, not 365.
360 days based on the Hillel calendar. But, but that was 200 AD. One rabbi who came up with this new method of calculating. He rearranged the calendar. He dropped 200 years, approximately 200 years out of it, and moved the timeline so that Jesus wouldn't be born, could not have been born when he was born. And so when we look at this being year 57, what was this, 5780, and if you're a Y6Ker, which I am, if a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day, well, I look at the 6 days of creation, then the seventh day being 1,000-year reign, 1,000-year rest. Then I look at the calendar. The Essenes actually came up with an arithmetic calendar that puts it so that all the feast days fall on the exact same day every year, which makes more sense than a floating lunar calendar that Hillel ascribed to. So it was another one of those changes that was made that all of a sudden the world adopted, and we look at the Jewish calendar and say, oh, well, this must be right, but there's a backstory to it that it was changed.
Okay, thank you for that.
So you are correct. As a matter of fact, in the 613 commands, the mitzvot, 365 are thou shalt not.
Okay.
The remaining 248 are the numbers of bones in the body. And you say, well, that's not right. I went to medical school. There's only 219 bones in the body. According to the rabbis, there were 248. So this is how they considered what we don't call bones today, they considered to be bones. So that was the basis of that. But if God constantly reminds us to fear not, He's not just telling us that to trust. He's telling us that because fear does harm to our brain chemistry.
Yes, yes, it does.
So it's a protective instruction as much as it is a faith instruction, that there is a consequence, a medical consequence to fearing.
And when we can incite fear in people, though, if you think about this on the conflict between good and evil, when we can get people afraid, we can manipulate them to take actions that they wouldn't do otherwise. We can undermine their freedoms, and when we undermine freedoms, we can undermine love. Fear and coercion, or fear and loss of freedom, are both enemies to love. Love, on the other hand, perfect love casts out fear. So as we come to love, altruism, compassion for other people, as we activate those emotions and those concerns for others, neurobiologically we turn on brain circuits that send a calming circuit down, a signal down to our fear circuits, and we neurobiologically experience less fear when we activate the experience of love and concern for other people. And genuine love really only grows in atmospheres of freedom. You can't put a gun to somebody's head and say, love me or I'll kill you. You can't get love by threatening to kill people who don't love you. You have to leave people free not to. And it's in the atmosphere of freedom. You go, I just want your happiness. If you want to be with me or not, that's okay, just as long as you're healthy and happy. That draws at least human love, not necessarily romantic love, but it's like, I like you. I like you. That's great. See, love awakens love. Okay, so as we understand, this is God's design is truth. He's the God of truth. He's the God of love, and He's the God of freedom. And Satan's weapons are weapons of lies, and weapons of fear, and weapons of coercion. And fear leads to act in self-interest rather than in love for other people. And when we have lies will break love in a relationship. If somebody lies, if you believe them. If you believe a lie that your spouse is having an affair, even though they're not, that belief causes a change in you. You are afraid that they're going to bring a disease home. You're afraid that they're not loyal and faithful, and that fear causes you to act in self-interest to protect yourself. And that's Satan, the father of lies, to incite more fear in us. I heard somebody say that a demon will tell you 9 truths to get you to believe 1 lie.
Reminds me of that great line from Batman 1, so often quoted in Scripture, that Michael Keating said, if you dance with the devil doesn't change, you do.
Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah. And so this is to watch what's happening in society today. There is a real virus that is spreading through society. We don't have the actual firm evidence on how lethal it is. What we have in America is 150 people have so far died in America from this virus. I think over 20,000 have died from the flu this year. So, do we need to ignore this? No, we need to take it seriously, but do we need to be in terror of it? Is it the final end plague that will destroy the world? No, it's not that.
You bring up an interesting point. In the Bible, plagues and pestilence are 2 distinctly different terms. Pestilence is what we are experiencing now.
Right.
It is a contagious, widespreading disease or virus. Plagues can be in the form of, plagues can include pestilence, but in addition to that, we can look at the various plagues of locusts and those kind of things. But pestilence, like in Psalm 91, we actually did Michael Heiser and I did a 1 hour on why Psalm 91 is not an immunization against the coronavirus.
Right. Right.
Because you'd have to dwell. We don't dwell in the presence of the Lord. We don't dwell there.
Right.
We enter in and enter out like it's a revolving door, but we do not dwell there. And as we look at what the statement is, if I dwell there in the shadow of the, then yes, okay, I'm going to be protected. But we don't. And so the reality is I can pray that a lot, but if I'm not in the presence of God, and as we look back to the first temple or the tabernacle, when we could be in the physical presence of God, we can emulate that today, but look at what they did. They immediately responded by saying, no gatherings of larger than this number of people at any single time, virtually closing our churches. That's a real indicator of us getting a taste of something that is going to come, that the Bible tells us is going to come. And how are we responding? Are we responding with fear? Are people really responding? Stores are now stopping taking cash because this virus lives on surfaces longer than we realize. The 10, 12 days that this virus can live on a surface. We don't know what the lifespan is. It's highly unusual that a cold virus dies rapidly, especially when exposed to heat. This one doesn't. This has some very unique characteristics to it that are making it hard for us to determine exactly how to combat it, because you can disinfect something, but the next person comes along can reinfect it, and it could live there. You don't know if somebody coughed on a banister or coughed on anywhere. So the problem is that, and we've had this actual conversation before, that we have dominion over that which we can name and define. Now, we've named this, but we've yet to be able to define it. We don't know its life cycle. We don't know its enemies. We don't know its antidote. We don't know its reaction. They're now saying that ibuprofen taken while having an active case of COVID-19 is harmful.
Well, they're saying it may be. There is actually no evidence that it is, but based on a childhood disease that when children can get the flu or get a cold and they take aspirin, there's a disease called Ray's disease. There has been a concern that a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like Motrin ibuprofen might be involved in affecting the lungs, but there is no actual evidence it does. There's just the hypothesis that it might.
This is also very, very interesting. We're talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, author of The Aging Brain, The God-Shaped Heart, The God-Shaped Brain. The dynamics of our conversations are always insightful and illustrative of how many things affect our brain chemistry and in impacting our brain chemistry as it relates to dementia, early onset of dementia, reversing the effects of dementia, how we weaken our brain chemistry through reactions and responses, our way of thinking. If our mind is biblically based, we have a much better response mechanism in faith first. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness. We're going to be of much more of a sound mind than we will be if we live as the world lives. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion and talk about the effects of anxiety, worry, real fear, a natural fear, isolation, trauma, which this falls into a trauma category, as to if we begin to go into a quarantine mode where all of our social activities are curtailed, our social interactions are managed or even cut off. What is that going to do in the case of the advancement of dementia? of giving us or opening the door to some of the problems associated with us not able to be able to visit those in nursing homes that need that extra attention, and how it's going to change interaction between people, which the social construct of man is to be in relationship. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English, and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Timothy Jennings, as we do on the 3rd Thursday of every month at the 10 o'clock hour. He's the author of The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. Dr. Jennings, welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth.
Eric, always enjoy it.
Tim, we're getting so much information about hand washing and disinfecting and Purell and all these other things, but we're not getting a lot of advice about mental health. We're not getting a lot of counsel about, okay, so if you go into, your restaurants are closed, so you're not going to have the fellowship of being able to sit down to a meal. Now in Alabama, you can only have groups as large as 25, as long as you can provide 6 feet spacing in between those people. That's it. That's now enacted and signed The restaurants have all closed. It's delivery, curbside delivery, or drive-through only. All of the beaches in Alabama are officially closed as of tomorrow. The universities are all closed.
Yeah, you know, and I understand the logic of why they're doing it. I'm not convinced myself yet that ultimately the nation is going to be better off for it. I'm not diminishing, again, the reality of this virus and its contagiousness. I am only saying that there are, prices that we're paying as a nation because of this. Now, what the science shows regarding social isolation, people who are socially isolated were compared to people who were socially connected, and they specifically looked at their immune systems, and those who were socially isolated had compromised immune systems that made them more vulnerable to viral infections. Those who were socially connected had immune systems that were less vulnerable. They could fight off a viral infection easier. And so, this social disconnect, I would tell people that doesn't mean stay connected at least with your family. So my wife and I, because we have each other, we're not socially isolated. We still have social support with each other. That's going to protect our immune systems. But if you're all by yourself, hiding away in a house somewhere, and you're not connected with anybody, that can actually raise your stress level, which can compromise your immune response.
As we look at the compounding factors here, so social isolation diminishes your immunity. In trying to fill time in a productive way, people have not, except on vacation, had this amount of time, if they're not working in a remote capacity, this amount of time to have to deal with. How to keep your brain active and stimulated. Reading, there's people who are not avid readers. Reading the Bible, 80% aren't going to do it. They don't do it now. They're not going to do it because there's the coronavirus. I would love to say that God is using the coronavirus to drive people back to the Word. You're going to be at home alone. You walk through the house and you say, well, here's a book I haven't picked up in a long time.
Well, you know what it might be doing? It might be causing people to ask the bigger questions. So many people are just so busy with the rat wheel of life. This is, and I think it is causing people to ask the questions, what's happening in the world? Now, the problem is we live in such a humanistic world that people may be asking the question, and they're looking for man to save man. They're looking for the federal government to be their savior, rather than people. So it really is important for people like yourself, people like myself, who believe in the Lord, to be out there like we're doing with this program, to let people know, irrespective of all the good and healthy decisions that we as human beings need to make in governance of ourselves and the leadership of our country, there is a higher power. There is a creator God who has the world in his hands, and for those who trust him, he's got a plan. I can't see exactly in every detail where he's acting in this circumstance, but I do pray that God will use this to reach hearts and minds for his eternal kingdom.
It's interesting you said that. We sent out an announcement. We were supposed to be in Israel next week, and of course that trip was canceled. So I sent an email blast out to all of our publishers and all of our publicists and said that we will be in studio throughout this period of time which we would have been in Israel, because we're building out our Roku channel, our Apple TV channel, our Amazon Fire channel, our Apple apps, our Android apps. By the time this is over, we will have in full development for release May the 1st an increase in reach of 200 million, so that the program can go out on every possible outlet available. And we're reassigning the time, reassigning how we're going to apply the time. So we can't be in Israel. So we can be here, and we can be very, very productive and take on a what appears to be a monumental task, but is actually really quite structured, and a very exciting thing that, we have Bible studies online. You have at comeandreason.com teachings online.
Yep.
This is the time when people can be turning to the blogs and to the podcasts and get a sampling of teachers they've never heard before.
And I think the biblical worldview has a much, much healthier understanding of these types of things than the non-biblical worldview. For instance, let's just talk briefly about what a virus is. Many people I don't think, really understand it. They think viruses are living organisms. That question is, in the scientific community, always debated. In fact, they're typically described as a virus being on the edge of life, but not actually being alive itself. What a virus is a piece of coded material. In a living organism, it's made out of DNA and RNA. In a computer, it's made out of written code. But it's just code that has the ability to get into the operating system of either a computer or a cell and take over the machinery of either the computer or the cell and redirect the machinery of the cell now in living organisms to create more virus. Me, more of me. It's very selfish, which if, as I understand things now, by the way, there's no scientific explanation as to the origin of viruses from an evolutionary worldview. There's lots of theories, but they always run into problems and they never really get explained. The biblical worldview makes perfect sense, though. The biblical worldview, God created life. And in order to have life, he created physical matter, atoms that you make proteins and lipids and DNA out of. He created the energy, breath of life. He breathed into man. And he also coded the information that was needed for life into the DNA. God wrote that code. Okay? And as God created life, it was perfect and flawless, without any defects of any kind. There was no sickness, there was no death, and there were no poisonous plants, and there were no thorns, and there were no thistles in God's Garden of Eden. However, after Adam sinned, we have a malevolent intelligence who now has access to planet Earth. In Romans chapter 8, Paul says, all nature groans under the weight of sin. And Jesus in the parable talks about an enemy has sown seeds of decay into the field. And so there's this biblical worldview that after sin, a malevolent intelligence was able to write bad code, and viruses are actually part of Satan's infection of God's creation. Metaphor would be when Microsoft and Apple write their operating systems, those operating systems are launched without any viral infections. And those operating systems do not spontaneously create computer viruses. But malevolent people can analyze that system and then purposely write code to damage and infect it. That's Satan. He's the originator of viruses. And that's where I think they came from in the world to begin with. And they're not really living organisms. They are pieces of God's RNA, DNA that God made that he has hacked and uses to cause disease and defect. That's my worldview on it.
You know, I watched a TED Talk years ago about, I think it was like, it could have been 10 or 12 years ago, but it so stuck with me that bacteria has a communication system. Bacteria talks to other bacteria. Your body is filled with bacteria. And how does it know that you have a cut? Because the bacteria nearby says, hey boys, come on, we've got work to do. And the same bacteria that may be in your big toe is called through this communication system to come and join together with its friends. And they tracked the system and said that the day will come when we will not be using antibiotics. We will be using a false signal, which you would take a tablet that would tell the bacteria, hey, nothing to see here. Everything's okay. And it would then send a false positive or a false negative, if you will, to the bacteria saying, no reason to deploy, everything's okay here. And I'm wondering if viruses have that same attribute.
Well, the bacteria are actually organisms. They have nuclei. They have their own mitochondria. They have organelles. They have the ability to, they have cell membranes, they have the ability to reproduce, etc. Viruses will have a lipid membrane or a protein membrane sometimes, but they don't have a nucleus, they don't have organelles, they don't have mitochondria, they don't have machinery inside. They're just simply strands of either RNA or DNA code that will able to insert into a cell. And once they're in the cell, they co-opt the cell's machinery and redirect that cell's machinery to make more of the virus, and the cell dies. And when the cell dies, it bursts and releases all these viruses, which are just strands of code that will infect cells around it, and that's how it keeps propagating. So I really don't see viruses as being living organisms. They're pieces of the code of a living organism. But they themselves, I don't see that in my way of seeing the world. Now, some of the antiviral medications work, though, by pretending to be RNA or DNA. And when the virus is reproducing in a cell, it will direct the machinery to build its new viral code with some pieces of the medicine instead of real RNA and DNA. And that actually makes the new piece of code inert. It can't function, and so it stops the reproduction cycle by introducing false DNA basically into the reproduction cycle of the viruses as they're trying to rebuild it on the cell's machinery.
As we look at the human response to this COVID-19, it seems that some are more traumatized than others.
Yes, let's talk about that very briefly. And that has to do with perception rather than, and we're talking about people in the community who actually have not contracted it. We're not talking about people who actually have it, because I don't think we have good data on those, many of those. So let's talk about the people who are being traumatized but haven't actually been infected with COVID-19. Some people are being traumatized and some people are not because of the way they perceive it and the way they internalize it, not because they've actually been physically harmed by the virus. And so some of us are trusting in God. It's okay. I don't live in fear because I will take my precautions. But how this turns out is in the Lord's hands, and so we don't live under that constant threat assessment. We just do wise behaviors, and we're at peace. It's going to be okay. Other people, though, are very much in hypervigilant mode, creating in their minds every possible thing as a threat. That door handle, this, everything's a threat. So they're constantly being assaulted in their mind by virus, even though they're not being assaulted by virus.
Right.
And so it's their own mental perceptions that will cause trauma in this case. These are not actually real traumas, they're perceived traumas. I'll give you another metaphor. You're in a city and you've heard a report that a prisoner has broken out of prison and has gone on a rampage and has beaten up several people in the city. You hear that report, but you're in your house, you've got your locks on your door, you've got a security system, you're aware of it, but you're not really traumatized by it. You haven't been beaten up, you haven't been assaulted. Other people hear that, though, and they run and they hide in their closet, and they're terrified because they believe they're about to be beaten up. So it's not even though they actually haven't been traumatized. The house wasn't broken into. They weren't hit, but they have internalized what they heard on the news as something that applies personally to them, and they created trauma. There are people who get traumatized by news because of how they perceive it, not because they've actually been harmed.
Tapping into that passage in Scripture about casting down vain imagination.
Yes. And this is one of the things, imagination is an ability that God has given us, but that ability is to be governed by our good judgment, our good reason. And some people let their imaginations run wild, and they imagine all kinds of things that are not actually in evidence or even reasonable, and that creates all kinds of fears that kind of reinforce the negative imaginations, and they get stuck in these imaginary fear loops. And that is learning how to just go stop, wait. What's the truth? Yes, COVID's real. Yes, it's possible I could get infected, but I'm not infected. I will take precautions. If I get infected, the risks are generally pretty low. Then this is what the experts are saying. For the average American, even if you get infected, the risk of a bad outcome is very low, unless you have a compromised immune system or you're very elderly. And so the threat to the vast majority of Americans is reasonably low still.
You know, this isolation thing, I live in a older generation neighborhood, all garden homes, nobody has stairs, all preparing for, you're going to finish out your life in this home, and so you're not going to want to have stairs to climb and all kinds of trip and fall hazards. And so I found that in this past week, people are talking over the fences. They're meeting yard to yard and talking driveway apart, and I see more and more people converging onto the sidewalk or to the.
So what you're describing is a positive, and here's the positive out of this: we are getting a shared community experience. We are all in it together. We all are struggling together. We all have the same pressure. We all have this face at the same time. We have a common microscopic enemy that is interrupting all of our lives. And because of that, that allows for a shared community experience, which can build actually a sense of cohesion, a sense of community, as long as we don't experience the people in our community as the source of the threat. Okay. Right. As long as we are all still in the same boat. What the danger comes is when we identify people as, oh, that person's got a sniffle or a cold and it's their allergies because pollens are high right now, okay? And then we begin, wanting to stone that person because we see them as a threat when it's just an allergy. That would be bad. But as long as we see we're all in this together, then we can have what you're saying, a sense of cohesion and community.
We were built for relationship. The word community is really a conjugation of two words: common, unity, community. This was the church. It wasn't 50,000, it was 20, 25 that were gathered together. And I see this as a real opportunity for us to go back to the neighborhood, get to know your neighbors. Most people don't. Talk to people on the street. Most people don't. Walk your dog. Most people let them out the back. I've started walking my dog up and down where it's just one street, 61 homes, and walking her and saying hello to people and building a sense of community that will ultimately lead to, if someone has a need, we'll be able to respond. If there's companies that are out there that are in the landscaping business and they decide that they're going to send everybody home for a period of time and there's an overgrown yard, well, there's certainly 2 or 3 of us that, without having close physical contact, can go and clean up their yard for them and perform acts of service which are going to make us feel better by taking our eyes off ourselves, as we're supposed to, called to do in the Bible, and to look after each other and have that Acts chapter 2, no one in need, everyone taking care of each other, providing for each other, having things in common, and God will add to their numbers those being saved. And so, if I were to look for a spiritual lesson, it's to, let's stop feeding the emotional and start getting back to the spiritual and start being the body and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, your neighbor doesn't live 25 miles away and you only see them at church. Your neighbor lives next door. Your neighbor lives across the street. In today's environment, that's who your neighbor is, and we can use this as a stepping stone to building or rebuilding community.
We could say, don't be afraid, be real. In other words, deal with reality. Deal with what's real, what you're objectively dealing with. But don't be afraid. Yes, we need to be real. Take precautions. Keep that distance. It's advice, not because even for yourself, but because you want to just, it is true with the viral vector. If you stop the spread, you kill it. And so this is, our whole nation is working together just to stop it now in its tracks, 14, 15, 20 days, whatever, and then the thing is over and we can move on. Okay, great, let's do that, but we don't need to live in fear. Let's be real.
Well, I completely agree with you. Dr. Timothy Jennings, With us on the third Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock, author of The Aging Brain, Proven Steps to Prevent Dementia and Sharpen Your Mind. You can find more information at agingbrainbook.com and his ministry website, comeandreason.com. Tim, great to be with you. Wishing you and your family great health and safety, and we'll see you right back here at the same time next month for the next edition of, I don't even know what we call it, but we're going to do it with Dr. Timothy Jennings. Great to see you again.
Thank you, Eric. I'll see you next time.
God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.